Welcome back. Before I begin, I need you to stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to tell you, I've never said out loud to anyone. Not my sister, not my therapist, not even my closest friend who held me while I cried at the cemetery. The only person who ever knew the full truth was my husband, and he told me from beyond the grave. My husband's name was Kieran. He was 41 years old when he died, and he had the kind of laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants just to smile. We had been married for 6 years. We had a daughter named Poppy who was 4 years old and still asked me every morning where Daddy went. I still don't know what to tell her. Kieran was diagnosed with an aggressive form of glioblastoma, brain cancer, 14 months before he passed. The doctors gave him 8 to 12 months. He gave himself 14 because that was the kind of man he was. He refused to be a statistic. During those 14 months, I watched my husband slowly lose the ability to do everything he loved. He stopped being able to drive. Then he stopped being able to work. Then he stopped being able to hold Poppy without shaking. But he never stopped being present. Every night, no matter how much pain he was in, he sat at the kitchen table with us for dinner, even when he couldn't eat, even when he could barely hold his head up. He sat there because he said the table was his favorite place in the world. I think about that now, every single day. We buried Kieran on a Thursday in late October. The leaves were orange and gold, and the sky was that flat gray color that makes everything feel like a photograph. My mother-in-law held Poppy during the service because I couldn't stop shaking long enough to hold anyone. My own mother stood next to me and kept squeezing my hand, and I kept thinking, at least I have her. At least I have family. I was so wrong. After the graveside service, as people drifted back toward the cars, a man I barely recognized approached me. His name was Felix. He had worked with Kieran at the firm for 3 years. I had met him maybe twice at company events. He was quiet, the kind of person who blends into the background at parties. He waited until my mother had walked away to speak to me. He looked around first. That's the detail I keep coming back to. He looked around like someone might be watching. Then he pressed a small manila envelope into my hand. It was sealed with tape, and on the front, in Kieran's handwriting, that familiar slant I would recognize anywhere, were 4 words, "For my wife only." "He asked me to give you this," Felix said quietly. He was very specific. He said, "Don't open it here," and he paused, lowering his voice further. He said, "Don't open it anywhere near your family." I stared at him. What does that mean? Felix looked at me with something I can only describe as grief, mixed with relief, like a man who had been carrying a weight for a long time and was finally setting it down. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." And then he walked away. I carried that envelope for 2 hours before I opened it. I carried it through the reception at my in-laws' house, through the conversations with cousins I barely knew, through watching my mother organize the food on the buffet table with the quiet efficiency she's always used to avoid sitting with her feelings. I carried it while my sister-in-law topped off my wine glass and said, "Kieran would want you to be happy," which is something people say when they don't know what else to say. I carried it home in my purse. I put Poppy to bed at 7:30. She asked for the story about the bear who lives in the lighthouse. Kieran's story, the one he made up, and I told it from memory with a voice that barely held together. When she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen. I made tea. I didn't drink. And I opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a single index card in Kieran's handwriting that said, "Watch the files in order. All of them. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I love you more than any words I ever had. K." My hands were shaking when I plugged it into my laptop. There were 4 video files. Kieran had labeled them by date. The oldest was from 8 months ago. I pressed play. He looked thin in the video, thinner than I remembered from that period. But of course, I had been standing right next to him, and you don't notice gradual change when you're living inside it. He was sitting at the small desk in his home office, the one we had moved to the corner of our bedroom when he stopped being able to manage the stairs reliably. Behind him, I could see the framed photo of our wedding day that sat on the windowsill. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Okay, I'm going to say this clearly because I might not get another chance to say it at all." He took a breath. "I know about the money. And I know who took it. He then spent the next 11 minutes explaining everything. Here's what I did not know. Kieran had set up a trust fund for Poppy the year she was born. He was meticulous about our finances. It was one of the things I loved and occasionally teased him about. The trust was worth $340,000 by the time he was diagnosed, built from careful saving, inheritance from his grandfather, and a small stock portfolio he had managed since his 20s. When Kieran got sick, he asked his brother, my brother-in-law, a man I will call exactly what he is, to help manage some of the financial paperwork. Kieran's hands were beginning to shake. He was having headaches that made it hard to read documents. He trusted his brother completely. His brother's name is Dermot. He is 38 years old. He coaches Little League and makes his own hot sauce, and everyone at every family gathering thinks he is the funniest person in the room. Dermot had been slowly, systematically transferring money out of Poppy's trust for 7 months. Not all at once. Small amounts, $4,000 here, $7,500 there. Transfers into an account Kieran didn't recognize, routed through a business entity that turned out to be a shell company Dermot had registered in Delaware 18 months earlier, 4 months before Kieran's diagnosis. By the time Kieran discovered it, $94,000 was gone. Kieran found out because of a notification from the bank, an alert he had set up years ago and forgotten about, still tied to an old email address he hadn't used in months. When his headaches were bad enough that he couldn't sleep one night, he had opened that old account looking for a distraction and found 37 alerts waiting for him. He didn't tell me. I know why, watching those videos. He said it himself. If I tell you now, you'll confront him. And I need more than our word against his. So instead, over the next 6 months while he was dying, my husband quietly built a case. He hired a forensic accountant through an attorney, paid for it out of his personal savings, an account I didn't know about, specifically so there would be no trace Dermot could find. He corresponded by email from an address he created for the purpose. He documented every transfer. He obtained records showing that Dermot had transferred $94,000 into the shell company and then withdrawn $91,000 in cash over a series of transactions. And then, this is the part that makes me have to stop and breathe every time I think about it, Kieran recorded himself. On 4 separate occasions spread over the last 8 months of his life, he sat at that desk and described everything he had found. He recorded himself going through the documents on camera. He recorded himself saying, clearly, "My name is Kieran Ashworth. Today's date is," and then he would state the date, and then he would explain in careful detail what the evidence showed. He did this in case the evidence was ever challenged, in case someone claimed the documents were fabricated after his death. He wanted his own voice, on camera with timestamps, explaining it while he was still alive. My husband was dying, and he spent his remaining energy making sure his daughter's money would be protected after he was gone. I watched all 4 videos that night. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I called the attorney whose name Kieran had included in the envelope, a woman named Bridget Harmon who worked in financial fraud litigation. She had already been briefed. Kieran had instructed her to expect my call after the funeral. I met with her 3 days later. I brought the USB drive. She brought a colleague who specialized in trust law. She was matter-of-fact and kind in equal measure. She told me that what Kieran had documented was thorough enough to refer to the state attorney general's office. She told me the shell company was real and traceable. She told me that the withdrawals were clear enough that Dermot would have very limited room to argue mistake or misunderstanding. She also told me something I had not considered, that Dermot had added his own name as a secondary contact on the trust account 8 months ago, using a forged authorization form, which meant this wasn't opportunism. He had planned this before Kieran even got sick enough to need help. I sat in that office chair and felt something cold and clear move through me. It wasn't grief anymore. Grief is soft. This was something harder. I did not call Dermot. I did not call my mother-in-law. I did not say anything at the next family dinner, which happened 12 days after the funeral, because my mother-in-law believes that togetherness heals things, and I sat at her table and watched Dermot refill his plate and make everyone laugh, and I said nothing. I want you to understand how difficult that was. I want you to understand that I sat 3 feet away from a man who had stolen $94,000 from my 4-year-old daughter while her father was dying, who had watched Kieran deteriorate week by week and kept taking money the whole time, who stood at the graveside in the dark coat with his hand on my shoulder and said, We're going to get through this together, okay? You're not alone. I smiled at him and said, "Thank you." And then I went home and I cried until I couldn't breathe. The state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation 11 weeks after I first met with Bridget. They executed a search warrant on Dermot's home and office on a Wednesday morning in February. I found out when my mother-in-law called me, hysterical, at 7:45 a.m. I told her I already knew. She asked me how. I told her that Kieran had known and that he had spent the last months of his life making sure it would be handled. She was silent for a very long time. Then she said, "He never told me." "No," I said. "He was protecting you too. I don't know if that helped her. I don't know if anything could have helped her in that moment, finding out that one of her sons had robbed the other son's dying daughter. I hope someday she finds a way to hold both of those things, the love she has for both of them, without it destroying her. That's her grief to carry, not mine." Dermot was charged with breach of fiduciary duty, financial elder and dependent abuse, and wire fraud. His attorney reached out to Bridget's office 3 weeks after the charges were filed, asking about a plea arrangement. There was no arrangement that gave him a pass. Bridget was very clear about that. He eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts and was ordered to repay $94,000 plus interest and was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility. He served 14, the same number of months Kieran lived after his diagnosis. I don't know if that means anything. I think about it sometimes. The money was returned to Poppy's trust, every dollar. I took some of the interest and did something that felt right. I donated it to the Brain Cancer Research Foundation that Kieran had quietly supported in the last year of his life. The foundation sent a card. It sits on our windowsill next to the wedding photo, the same one that was in the background of all 4 of his videos. Poppy is 5 now. She still asks about Daddy sometimes, but differently than before. She used to ask where he went. Now she asks me what he was like. She asks if he was funny. She asks if he liked the same foods she likes. Last week she asked me if he was brave. I told her he was the bravest person I have ever known. I told her that brave doesn't always look like loud and obvious. I told her that sometimes brave looks like a man sitting at a desk late at night when he can barely hold a pen, making sure the people he loves are going to be okay. She thought about that for a minute. Then she said, "I think I want to be brave like that." Me too, baby. Me too. I want to say one more thing before I go, because I know some of you are watching this and you have your own version of this story. Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's something else someone took from you. Time, trust, safety, the version of a person you thought you knew. I spent a long time being angry that Kieran didn't tell me while he was still here. I understand why he didn't. I respect why he didn't. But there is a grief inside the grief. A smaller, sharper thing that is just about wishing we could have talked about it. Wishing I could have told him you didn't have to do this alone. He was protecting me. He was protecting Poppy. He was protecting his mother. He was carrying this terrible knowledge and choosing every day to sit at our kitchen table for dinner anyway. I think that is the most loving thing I've ever witnessed. And I think about Felix. Quiet, background blending Felix, who carried that envelope for months and found me in the crowd after the service and pressed it into my hand. I called him after the investigation was complete. I wanted to thank him. He said he had promised Kieran and that a promise to a man like that was not something he was willing to break. There are good people in the world. They don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just show up, look around to make sure no one is watching, and slip something important into your hand. Hold on to those people. And if someone you love leaves something behind for you, a letter, a file, a conversation you weren't ready for, open it. Even if it's hard, even if it changes things, they left it because they trusted you to be strong enough to handle it. Kieran trusted me. I'm trying every day to deserve that. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you're new here. And if you have a story of your own, about betrayal, about love, about the people who showed up when it mattered, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in a cosmic way. I'm not someone who believes the universe hands out lessons on a schedule, but I do believe that the choices people make, quietly, in private, when no one is watching, eventually become visible. They always do. It just takes time. Dermot made his choices in private. He opened accounts in secret. He moved money in small enough amounts that he thought no one would notice. He stood at a graveside and put his hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. He did all of that, believing that the version of events he controlled was the only version that existed. That was his miscalculation. He forgot that someone else had also been working quietly and private when no one was watching. Kieran made his choices in private too. He sat at a desk in our bedroom with shaking hands and a failing body, and he built something careful and true. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask for credit. He just did the work because he understood something that I think is worth saying out loud. Integrity isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you're alone, exhausted, and no one will ever know either way. Kieran was alone in that room. He was exhausted, and he chose, every single time, to keep going. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal, though that's real and it left a mark I'll carry for a long time. What I keep coming back to is the intelligence of what Kieran did. Not intelligence like a test score. Intelligence like wisdom, like the ability to look at a painful situation clearly without letting the pain make your decisions for you. He could have confronted Dermot. He could have fallen apart. Instead, he thought, what does Poppy actually need? And then he worked backward from that answer with everything he had left. I'm trying to learn that. The clarity of it. The discipline of asking what actually matters before you react. And Poppy, she's 5. She doesn't understand any of this yet. But she asked me if her father was brave, and I told her the truth, and I watched something settle in her face when I said it. Children understand more than we give them credit for. They're reading us all the time, learning from what we model, storing it somewhere deep. What Poppy has stored is a father who protected her even when he was gone. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. I'm not the same person I was before I opened that USB drive. I don't think that's a bad thing. I know now that love can be quiet and methodical and practical and practical. I know that the people who really have your back don't always announce it. Sometimes they just do the work and trust that you'll figure it out when the time is right. I know that betrayal from someone close leaves a specific kind of wound, but I also know it doesn't have to define what you believe about people. Felix showed me that. Bridget showed me that. Kieran showed me that most of all. If you're in the middle of something hard right now, I just want to say, keep your eyes open. Do the careful work. Don't let someone else's dishonesty turn you into a person who stops trusting entirely. The goal isn't to become harder. The goal is to become clearer. Kieran was clear, even at the end, especially at the end. I'm still learning how to be.